At exactly 47 seconds into the live broadcast, Tim Scott smirked, leaned into the mic, and slammed Jasmine Crockett with a line sharp as a dagger. "You're all noise, no substance." The room froze. 12 million Americans watched as Crockett's jaw tightened and her fingers slid toward a blood-red folder beneath the desk. What secret did she unleash? That made a sitting senator look like he'd seen a ghost on national television. At exactly 9:02 a.m., the cameras blinked red like sniper dots. CNN, C-SPAN, Fox News all locked in. Inside the Senate Banking Committee room, everything looked too perfect, too polished, like a courtroom built for TV, not truth. Flags stood stiff behind the senators like props in a play. Nameplates gleamed under the lights, but the faces behind them were colder than steel. They were here to talk about federal funds for minority communities, but the real show hadn't started yet. Senator Tim Scott leaned back in his chair like he owned the air in the room. His fingers laced together, elbows spread wide, chin lifted with that grin, part politician, part executioner. His navy suit didn't wrinkle. His eyes scanned the room like a hawk circling prey. He wasn't nervous. He was comfortable. Too comfortable. Like a man who'd rehearsed the kill shot. 3 seats down, Jasmine Crockett didn't move a muscle. Not one twitch, not one glance at her notes. She didn't need them. Everything she needed to say was already burned into her mind. Names, numbers, neighborhoods. Her stillness wasn't silence. It was pressure. Like the air before a storm. Like a loaded gun with the safety off. She felt it before it happened. The way the room's energy shifted. The fake smiles, the over-politeness, the rehearsed order. This wasn't a hearing, it was a trap dressed in marble. And the bait was her. When Tim Scott finally turned toward her, his grin sharpened like a blade. He adjusted his mic, cleared his throat, and leaned in, not to ask a question, but to make a move. What do you do when a man smiles at you like he's shaking your hand, but he's really tightening a noose? The moment hit like a slap with a smile. 1 second, Senator Scott was questioning a witness about community lending programs, dry, predictable, scripted. Then with a sudden pivot sharp enough to cut glass, he turned toward Jasmine Crockett, leaned forward into the microphone, and dropped the line like a hammer in a cathedral. "Besides making noise on social media, what exactly have you done?" The air cracked, not a shout, not a roar. Just calm poison dressed in politeness, and that made it worse. The room didn't gasp. It stopped breathing. Every head turned toward Jasmine, some wide-eyed, some smirking, and every camera, every lens, every digital eye zoomed in like they'd been waiting for this exact detonation. Tim Scott didn't blink. He sat back in his chair, hands folded like a professor, correcting a student like his years in office gave him the right to condescend. His smile stayed plastered on, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that men wear when they think they're untouchable, when they think they've just won. But this wasn't just about her. That line noise on social media was a missile wrapped in code. It wasn't just aimed at Jasmine. It was aimed at every young black woman who dared to be visible. Every activist turned legislator. Every politician who didn't climb the ladder, but kicked down the gate. It was an attack on her work, her worth, and the way she connected with the people who trusted her. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't move. But something behind her eyes shifted, a slow burn rising. What kind of man mistakes the quiet before a storm? For surrender, Jasmine Crockett stayed perfectly still. Not a word, not a breath wasted. Her eyes locked on Tim Scott like a lens sharpening before the shot. And in that silence, America leaned closer. Across the room, Scott smirked, mistaking quiet for collapse. He adjusted his cuffs like the matter was settled, like the dagger he threw had already landed. But the room hadn't moved on. It had frozen, waiting. Inside Jasmine, the silence wasn't empty. It was crowded, with memories, with scars, with every time she'd been cut off mid-sentence, called aggressive, dismissed in the middle of brilliance. Rage moved in her chest, not wild, but trained. The kind of anger that doesn't scream. It calculates. She remembered the courtroom in Dallas where a judge called her emotional for defending a client on the verge of deportation. She remembered the state trooper who laughed when she showed her congressional badge. She remembered the Twitter comments, affirmative action hire, woke puppet angry black woman. They all sounded like Tim Scott now, just dressed in a nicer suit. But Crockett didn't come here for revenge. She came for justice. And justice, when cornered, doesn't shout, it waits. It studies. It chooses the precise second to strike. And Scott, wrapped in his overconfidence, had just given her the opening. Her fingers slowly tapped the table once. Not out of nerves, out of rhythm. A beat, a cue. Because her moment wasn't coming. It had just arrived. What happens when the woman you tried to embarrass has been waiting her whole life for this exact moment? Before the marble floors, the microphones, and the headlines, there was South Dallas. Not the postcard version, the real one. Cracked sidewalks, flickering street lamps, and a mother who worked 2 jobs and still came home with aching hands. Jasmine didn't grow up with power. She grew up watching her mother argue with landlords, with bill collectors, with school administrators who assumed her daughter wasn't college material. She wore hand-me-down shoes that pinched her toes and studied under streetlights when the power got cut. On weekends, she pumped gas and wiped windshields for tips just to afford textbooks. Her lunch money often became her bus fare, and yet she never complained. Because in her world, silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. By 18, Jasmine had already learned that nobody was coming to rescue her. Not the city, not the state, not the system. So she decided to rescue herself. She clawed her way into law school, not because doors were open for her, but because she kicked them down. Every exam, every late night, every condescending professor who asked if she was in the right building only made her sharper. When she passed the bar, she didn't head to a glossy firm downtown. She walked into courtrooms with broken air conditioning defending the poor, the wrongly accused, the invisible. She argued in front of judges who looked through her. She won cases no one thought she could, not because she was lucky, but because she was relentless. So when Tim Scott called her a performer, Jasmine didn't flinch. She'd been underestimated her entire life. And every time someone mistook her silence for softness, they learned the hard way what steel sounds like when it finally speaks. Back in the hearing room, the cameras were still rolling, but the performance had shifted. Tim Scott leaned in again, voice calm, words sharpened like razors wrapped in velvet. Real experience, he said, is earned right here in these chambers, not on the internet, not in hashtags. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a declaration that his kind of power was the only one that mattered. He adjusted his tie, nodded slightly like a man reminding the room of the hierarchy, his hierarchy, where decades of tenure were supposed to trump years of lived struggle, where being chosen meant being legitimate, and those who fought their way in, they were anomalies, temporary, replaceable. To the audience at home, it looked like civility. But to anyone who'd ever been patronized by someone with a title, it was war by another name. Crockett didn't speak, didn't even blink. But something behind her stillness tightened like a string pulled taut. He wasn't just coming for her resume. He was coming for the belief that people like her didn't belong in places like this. This was the oldest tactic in politics, disguised supremacy as seniority dress, condescension, and decorum. The idea that if you didn't come up the same way, if your path wasn't paved by donors' legacy or comfort, then you were an outsider playing dress-up. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to blend in. She was here to burn down the rules that said she had to. And as Scott leaned back, satisfied, Jasmine's silence spoke louder than any speech he'd ever rehearsed. What happens when the outsider they tried to belittle turns out to be the only one really listening? Jasmine Crockett reached for her phone with the precision of someone unlocking a weapon, not a screen. No sudden movements, just a slow, deliberate swipe. A single camera top left corner zoomed in tight, catching the faint glint in her eye and the cold clarity on her face. The nation didn't know it yet, but the tables had already turned. Behind her, a young aide leaned in slightly, no words spoken, just a subtle nod. That nod meant the file was loaded. Every receipt, every vote, every contradiction in Tim Scott's record sat waiting in her hands like a lit fuse. The trap he thought he'd sprung had just snapped shut on him instead. Across the room, Scott leaned back, smug and oblivious. To him, Crockett was scrolling, searching, scrambling. But she wasn't searching for answers. She already had them. She was scrolling for precision, deciding which blow to land first. This wasn't panic. It was choreography. Silence still hung over the room like a glass ceiling about to crack, the kind of quiet that only exists right before things explode. Jasmine didn't rush. That wasn't her style. She didn't need to shout. Her weapon was timing, and it was now down to the second. Her thumb hovered over a single highlight, a voting record, a quote, a lie. The screen glowed like a match in a dry field, and when she finally raised her head, the shift was instant. No words yet, but the look in her eyes said it all. She wasn't quiet because she had nothing to say. She was quiet because she was about to change everything. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean forward. She simply adjusted the microphone with one finger, looked directly at Tim Scott, and said in a tone smooth as ice and sharp as glass, "Senator Scott, since you're so curious about what I've done, let me educate you." The words dropped like steel onto the marble floor. A few heads turned sharply. One aide in the back audibly sucked in air. Scott didn't move, but his jaw tightened just enough to betray the flicker of a man who suddenly realized he might have miscalculated. Jasmine didn't blink. 47 bills. $3.2 million in funding. Over 800 lives directly changed from veterans to immigrants to single moms. Her delivery wasn't defensive. It was surgical. She wasn't defending herself. She was dissecting the accusation. Across the chamber, the room fell into a kind of reverent stillness, not fear, anticipation. Everyone knew they were no longer watching a hearing. They were watching a public correction, and the man being corrected was sinking deeper into his leather seat. Jasmine continued unfazed. "But maybe numbers don't move you, Senator. Maybe you need faces. I could tell you about Maria, a single mom who finally got housing after my office stepped in. Or James, a disabled vet whose benefits had been frozen for 9 months until we made one call." Scott stared straight ahead now, eyes narrowing, hands clasped too tightly. But Crockett wasn't done. She hadn't come to defend her record. She'd come to bury his illusion of superiority one fact at a time. Jasmine didn't pause. She didn't need permission. Her voice dropped slightly slower now, not out of hesitation, but control. "You think social media is a gimmick? My tweets helped over 100,000 kids learn how to apply for student aid. Not one of them cared if I wore pearls or a power suit. They cared that someone was speaking their language before the system drowned them in silence." She leaned back, eyes locked on Scott. "You mock the viral clips, Senator. But those clips, they're lifelines. They're the reason a single mother in Houston didn't give up when her Medicaid was denied. They're the reason a high school senior in Fort Worth still believes college is possible." Her voice didn't crack, it carved. And then came the numbers delivered like hammer strikes. "In my district, violent crime dropped 15% last year thanks to targeted community programs we helped fund. In yours, it rose by 9. My office secured expanded mental health coverage for low-income families. Yours voted against it twice. No one breathed. Not even Scott. It wasn't a comparison anymore. It was an autopsy." Jasmine wasn't just dismantling a narrative, she was dragging it into the light bone by bone. She wasn't playing defense. She was drawing blood. She leaned slightly forward again, voice softer, deadlier. "You can call me a performer. That's fine. But you'd better ask yourself this: if I'm just noise, why are so many people finally hearing what they've been screaming for generations?" The crowd didn't applaud, but they didn't have to. Because Crockett wasn't talking for the room. She was talking for the country that's never had a mic. The camera didn't flinch, but Tim Scott did. His lips parted slightly as if a rebuttal might surface, but nothing came out. No words, no smirk. Just a flicker of disbelief in his eyes caught in perfect high definition. For the first time in the entire hearing, the senator looked small. Jasmine Crockett had said her piece not with rage, but with precision that left no air for spin. Her hands rested calmly on the desk, her phone now face down, like a weapon holstered after battle. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The silence echoing across the chamber was the applause. Outside the walls of the hearing room, America was already on fire. Twitter cracked first. The clip hit in under 90 seconds. Jasmine Crockett just bodied Tim Scott live. One post read, racking up 40,000 likes in under 10 minutes. Hashtag Crockett claps. Back climbed to number 3, then number 1 trending nationwide. TikTok stitched it within moments. Teens, lawyers, veterans, single moms, all weighing in with the same message. She didn't just clap back, she shut it down. Political influencers rewound the moment on live streams, pausing to admire every beat, every breath she didn't waste. And the internet for once seemed united in awe. Meanwhile, in the chamber, Scott remained frozen, blinking tight-jawed, shifting in his seat like the chair had suddenly grown thorns. He'd walked into this hearing thinking he was the teacher. But now the nation had just witnessed a masterclass, and he was the student left staring at the board. What happens when a senator gets publicly schooled on live national TV? She could have stopped. She'd already turned the hearing upside down, already left a senator speechless. But Jasmine Crockett didn't come to win a round. She came to end the illusion. And when she leaned back into the microphone, calm, collected, she dropped the one word that no black politician ever expects to hear in public. Senator Scott, you've become the GOP's token black voice. The room didn't gasp, it froze, like oxygen had been sucked out of the air. Every aide paused mid-typing. Every senator stiffened, unsure whether to look away or straight ahead. The marble walls didn't echo, they held their breath. Jasmine didn't blink, didn't soften. You're not their conscience, you're their cover. They gut our rights and you smile on camera? Her voice never wavered. It didn't need to. Across from her, Scott's hands finally moved, clenching slowly into fists on the desk, knuckles whitening. But his mouth stayed shut, because he knew exactly what that word meant. Token, not representative, not leader, used. And now the label was out there, not whispered behind closed doors, but spoken into the congressional record for the whole country to hear. Jasmine continued slower now, almost surgical. You don't make them more just. You make them feel less guilty. That line cut deeper than any legislation. It wasn't a policy critique, it was a dismantling of identity. In a room built on image and control, Crockett had just shattered both with a single word, and dared everyone to look at the pieces. The word hadn't even finished echoing through the chamber before the outside world erupted. Cable news scrambled for clips. Fox News broke in first, calling Crockett's comment disrespectful, divisive, and a disgrace to decorum. Their anchors wore pained expressions, their voices shaking with righteous outrage, as if Jasmine had set the Constitution on fire instead of speaking an uncomfortable truth. But over at MSNBC, it was different. She said what no one else had the courage to say, one commentator declared, pointing directly into the camera. That wasn't an outburst, that was a mirror. And some people don't like their reflection. The clip went viral before the segment ended. On Black Twitter, the response was volcanic. She didn't break the rules, one user wrote, she broke the silence. Thousands of posts echoed the same message. She said what we've been thinking for years. Civil rights attorneys, barbershop owners, grandmothers in church hats, college students and bus drivers. The people who never get a mic now speaking loud through hers. Churches replayed the moment on loop. TikTok creators stitched the footage with tears in their eyes and fire in their throats. Hashtag Token No More was born and trended in under an hour. Crockett wasn't just winning a moment, she was breaking open a truth too long, buried under politeness. And as the pundits argued about tone, the people heard something deeper, a crack in the dam. A sentence that didn't just call out Tim Scott, but called in a generation. She wasn't just confronting a senator, she was confronting a system. And once a truth like that escapes into the air, who dares try to bury it again? Jasmine didn't wait for the applause to die down. She didn't need approval, she needed truth to land where it hurt. Her voice cut through the marble chamber like a scalpel. Calm, controlled, ruthless. You don't get to talk about lifting our people while voting against healthcare, minimum wage, and education. Scott shifted in his seat, face tightening as if preparing to respond. He leaned toward his mic, breath drawn, but before sound could escape, Jasmine's voice sliced straight through him. I'm not finished. The silence that followed wasn't passive, it was electric. Controlled by her now, the hearing room had become a courtroom, and Jasmine was delivering closing arguments with the weight of every soul the system had overlooked. You vote no, then go on TV talking about bootstrap success. But whose boots, Senator? Because it's not the ones working double shifts just to keep the lights on. She didn't blink. She didn't stumble. You stand on that Senate floor quoting Dr. King, then block the very bills meant to protect the people he died for. You speak about dignity while denying children free lunch. You preach freedom and then slam the door behind you. Scott didn't move. He couldn't, because Crockett wasn't debating anymore. She was reclaiming. Her words weren't aimed at him. They were aimed at everyone who had ever been told to wait their turn, to speak softer, to stay small. And when she leaned back, hands folded like a verdict had just been delivered, the chamber remained dead silent. Because when a woman says, "I'm not finished," America listens. The backlash came fast and loud. Conservative media lit up like dry brush under lightning. Unprofessional, too emotional. Another angry outburst from the radical left. They clipped her sharpest lines out of context, looped them on primetime, framed her passion as hysteria. The talking points were clear discredit. The woman distort the message. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't backpedal, apologize, or soften the edge. She tweeted just 9 words, and they hit harder than any press release. "Truth doesn't need permission to be loud." The phrase exploded. Overnight, it was printed on T-shirts, quoted in classrooms, posted in storefront windows from Oakland to Atlanta. TikTok flooded with mashups of her speech, each remix angrier, prouder, sharper. YouTube channels replayed the hearing like it was a battle rap. In one viral video, a teen girl whispered, "She spoke for every woman who's ever been told to sit down. They said she crossed a line." But America saw the truth. They were just scared of her voice coming from the wrong mouth. And Jasmine. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She kept showing up to the Capitol, to interviews, to town halls with the same fire in her chest and facts in her hand. Because when a system tries to shrink you with labels, sometimes the loudest thing you can do is refuse to shrink at all. The public saw a hero. The system saw a problem. Behind closed doors, far from the cameras and applause murmurs, began to build sharp, strategic, and familiar. A few senior Democrats pulled aides into corners, speaking in hushed tones about optics, decorum, and long-term damage. What they really meant was, "She's too loud, too fast, too unfiltered, and too damn effective." One congressman, old enough to have voted against desegregation in college, whispered to his staff, "She needs to learn when to hold back." Another suggested she issue a clarifying statement. But Jasmine Crockett didn't come to Washington to be manageable, and she wasn't about to dim her voice to keep fragile egos comfortable. Then the tide turned. Nancy Pelosi stepped to the mic and called Jasmine's words a lightning rod of truth. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez posted a photo of the two women walking side by side, captioned, "Loud, black, unbothered. Get used to it." Within hours, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee blasted out a fundraising email with Jasmine's face front and center. Subject line: "This is what courage looks like." Donations poured in like a flood. The power brokers in press suits could whisper all they wanted. The people had spoken louder. And Crockett. She wasn't seeking permission. She was building momentum. Because in a town where most politicians negotiate behind velvet doors, Jasmine had kicked hers off the hinges, and now the back rooms were burning. What happens when the voice you tried to contain becomes the one the nation starts echoing? It didn't feel like politics anymore. It felt like something cracking open. On Facebook, retired teachers wrote, "Finally, someone speaks for us." On Instagram, nurses in scrubs posted her quote beneath photos from overnight shifts. On Twitter, a Vietnam vet tweeted, "She's got more guts than half the men I served with in D.C." And people listened because it wasn't just about Jasmine. It was about every voice that had been talked over, cut off, or pushed aside. The clip of her showdown with Scott was no longer just trending, it was teaching. Law professors across the country dropped their syllabus mid-semester to add it as a live case study. One played it in a constitutional law class and asked, "Is this what accountability looks like in the 21st century?" Another used it to explain strategic rhetoric, noting, "She didn't lose control, she seized command." At Morehouse, a professor paused the video after Jasmine said, "I'm not finished," and told the room, "Gentlemen, that's what power looks like when it's earned, not inherited." Meanwhile, protest signs across the country no longer bore slogans. They bore her exact words. High school students memorized her speech for debate tournaments. Black churches printed her lines on programs. Grandmothers repeated her into microphones on radio call-in shows. This wasn't a moment. It was a marker, a shift in tone, a declaration that the future wouldn't speak in whispers anymore. Can one woman shift the direction of a generation? Not just by raising her voice, but by making millions feel like it was finally their own. Jasmine Crockett didn't let the spotlight blind her. She turned it into a torch. While the headlines still echoed and the internet replayed her every word, she was already moving. Not to celebrate, to organize. In the weeks that followed the hearing, she launched a series of civic empowerment workshops across Texas town halls, turned into classrooms, parking lots, into power centers. From church steps to basketball courts, she taught people how to fight back with knowledge and their vote, and their voice. Her message was clear: viral moments mean nothing if they don't translate into movement. At one workshop, a single mother asked how to fight a utilities overcharge. Jasmine pulled out a packet, flipped it open, and said, "Start here and don't stop until they feel your presence." But she didn't stop at teaching. She launched a national initiative pushing for community-level budget audits so neighborhoods could see line by line where every promised dollar actually went. And if it didn't, the fight didn't go to Washington. It started right at home. She called it the People's Ledger, and within a month, over 50 districts had requested the toolkit. The world had seen her speak truth to power. Now they were watching her help others speak it for themselves. Because for Jasmine Crockett, the point wasn't just to clap back, it was to reach back, pull others forward, and show them that power doesn't trickle down. It gets built from the ground up. While Jasmine's star surged, Tim Scott's calendar began to bleed. One by one, conservative events dropped his name from the lineup. No public explanation. Just vanished from flyers, scrubbed from websites like he was never invited at all. Behind closed doors, the whispers grew louder than applause ever did. They said he looked weak, said the viral clip made him a liability, not a leader. He'd been pitched as the polished, unshakable bridge, but Jasmine turned that bridge into ash, not with insults, with facts. On Capitol Hill, he walked faster now. Fewer handshakes, more averted eyes. Aides deflected questions blaming media distortion, but no one was buying it. The hearing had been a turning point, and not in his favor. Then came the poll leaks. Among black voters under 40, his favorability tanked nearly 40%. Even moderates, once his safe base, began calling him out for sounding more like spin than service. Inside, the GOP donors pulled back. Invitations stopped coming. Scott tried to recover, released a video about healing across party lines. It landed flat. No one wanted healing from a man who couldn't hold his own or his truth. And when the cameras found him again, the posture had changed. No grin, no lean. Just eyes darting like a man trying to outrun a moment still chasing him. Because when a public figure is exposed not by scandal, but by silence in the face of truth, the fall doesn't echo. It suffocates. The headlines faded, but the ripple hadn't. In a quiet hallway of the Capitol between two committee meetings, a young intern stood waiting, fists clenched, words trembling on her tongue. Jasmine noticed her, paused. The girl took a breath and whispered, "I was ready to give up on DC until that day. Until you." Jasmine didn't respond right away. She just looked into the intern's eyes and saw herself. The same fire, the same doubt, the same hunger to matter in a place built to make people like them feel small. And in that moment, legacy wasn't some abstract word. It was standing right in front of her, alive. This wasn't luck. This wasn't viral fame. This was years of holding her voice in courtrooms where no one listened. Years of showing up when no one expected her to last. Jasmine didn't arrive at power, she built her own road to it. Brick by brick, case by case, fight by fight. Now others were stepping onto that road. Students, organizers, mothers, daughters. Not asking for permission, but asking for directions. Crockett placed a hand on the intern's shoulder and simply said, "Don't wait for the system to invite you. Kick the door in, and then hold it open." That wasn't advice, that was blueprint. Because Jasmine's rise wasn't a flash. It was a fuse, one lit in South Dallas, now burning across a nation. And when the next Crockett rises, will the system be ready? The chamber was packed, but the air felt hollow, as if everyone knew something heavy was coming. Jasmine Crockett stepped up to the microphone on the House floor, shoulders square, eyes, calm voice steady. No theatrics, just thunder wrapped in truth. And when she spoke, every head turned. Respect, she began, was never handed to women like me. We had to carve it out with facts, with fire, and with faith. Her words didn't rise, they cut. Through centuries of condescension. Through rooms built to ignore women who look like her. Through every backhanded compliment disguised as praise, there was no applause. Just silence, the kind that follows a punch to the chest. Some lawmakers shifted in their seats. Others looked down as if the carpet might save them from the reflection in her words. But Jasmine wasn't speaking for them. She was speaking through them to every girl who'd ever been told she was too loud, too bold, too much. She told the chamber how power wasn't about who sat at the table, it was about who built the damn table in the first place. And that sometimes change doesn't come from a vote. Sometimes it comes from a voice that refuses to stay in its place. It wasn't just a speech, it was a reckoning, and Capitol Hill would never sound quite the same again. While the marble chamber held its breath, the country exhaled. Screens flickered to life in kitchens, break rooms, living rooms still warm with last night's exhaustion. From Mississippi porches to Detroit classrooms, Americans paused not to cheer, but to listen. Clips of Jasmine's speech tore through the internet like wildfire. 12 million views in 4 days. Not just likes, shares, comments, testimonies. People weren't watching for entertainment. They were watching to remember what conviction sounds like. Something raw, something rare. On TikTok, young girls reenacted her words like scripture. On Facebook, elders called her the echo of Fannie Lou. News anchors tried to label it a viral moment. But for the people, it was personal. It was theirs. Barbershops played it on loop. Churches folded her lines into sermons. Grandmothers texted their granddaughters with one sentence. Did you see her? And everywhere the same feeling pulsed. Pride, fury, hope, and something else. Urgency. Because Jasmine hadn't just spoken for a moment. She had unlocked something, and once truth reaches the people, there's no shutting it off. She didn't raise her voice in the final seconds. She didn't need to. Jasmine Crockett stood on the House floor with the posture of someone who had already won not the vote but the narrative. Her words came slow, deliberate, like the last turn of a blade before it's sheathed. And when she looked directly into the cameras, it wasn't a speech anymore. It was a sentence for every person who had ever tried to shrink her. You wanted to humiliate me, she said, voice steady. What you did was hand me the mic. The chamber didn't move. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Just the sound of truth laying down like thunder. She let it hang in the air, the kind of silence that feels louder than applause. The kind that demands reflection, not reaction. She turned to leave but paused just one step from the podium. One last line delivered not for the record, but for the people watching who never imagined someone like them could speak in that room and change it. In politics, she said, eyes narrowing, you don't always need to scream to be heard. A breath, a pause. You just need to speak like someone who never had the luxury to stay silent. Then she walked off the floor, not as a freshman, not as a headline, but as the kind of leader history doesn't see coming until it's already too late to stop her. And the mic she carried, she never gave it back. You don't need to shout to be heard, just speak the truth when it matters most. Respect isn't given, it's claimed with courage. Will you stay silent, or will you speak up? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story hit home, don't just scroll. Like, share, and subscribe to Hill Insights, where truth speaks and silence breaks. Tap the bell because the next voice might be yours. What part made you stop and think? Tell us in the comments. Your voice belongs here. This dramatized story is inspired by real struggles and real people. All characters and dialogue are fictionalized for commentary and education. It is not intended to defame or mislead, but to inspire reflection and civic awareness. Thanks for watching. The truth hasn't ended, it's just waiting for someone brave enough to carry it forward.